Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, your deep dive into the latest action from the halls of Congress. I am Victor.
And I am Leanie. Today, we are unpacking a massive slate of bills, key nominations, and intense debates from the House floor. We will start with a topic that is taking us out of this world, literally. Victor, what is happening with space debris?
Well, Leanie, the Senate is looking at our orbit. They have introduced Senate Bill 1898, known as the Orbits Act of 2025. This bill focuses on the growing threat of orbital debris, which can seriously endanger space missions and commercial satellites. It directs the Department of Commerce to identify and catalog hazardous debris, and it tells NASA to set up a competitive demonstration project to research active debris remediation technologies.
That sounds like a major step towards space sustainability. Is there funding attached?
Yes, it authorizes $150 million through 2030. The goal is to build a commercial market for debris removal and have the National Space Council standardize debris mitigation across federal agencies.
Speaking of international and humanitarian issues, let us look at Senate Bill 4814. Senator Edward Markey and a bipartisan group introduced this to mandate that the Secretary of Homeland Security designate Haiti for temporary protected status. It aims to provide humanitarian relief to Haitian nationals amidst ongoing instability, keeping this status in effect until April 20, 2029. It has been referred to the Senate Committee on the Judiciary.
Moving back to domestic policy, let us talk about healthcare and social programs. There is Senate Bill 447, the Jobs and Opportunities for Medicaid Act. This bill proposes an amendment to the Social Security Act that would establish a work requirement for able-bodied adults enrolled in state Medicaid programs.
What exactly would that require of enrollees?
Starting January 1, 2026, these individuals would need to work or volunteer for at least 20 hours per week to keep their medical assistance. However, there are exemptions for pregnant women, primary caregivers of young children, people with medical disabilities, and those in substance abuse treatment. It is currently with the Committee on Finance.
We also have a series of transparency bills in healthcare. House Resolution 9397, the Premium Transparency Act, aims to hold health insurance issuers and Medicare Advantage organizations accountable. Starting in 2027, they will have to publicly report overhead costs, claim payments, and retained premium revenue in a consumer-friendly format. Then, by 2028, the Secretary of Health and Human Services must issue guidance for standardized, plain English details on deductibles, networks, and cost sharing.
That ties directly into two other Medicare Advantage bills. House Resolution 9395, the Transparency in Medicare Advantage Steering Act, targets third-party enrollment. Starting in 2028, Medicare Advantage organizations must report if an agent or broker enrolled an individual and disclose their compensation. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services will integrate this data and publish it online by 2030.
And then there is House Resolution 9392, the Medicare Advantage Cost Transparency Act, starting in 2027. It requires insurers to include allowed amounts and patient cost sharing, like deductibles and copays, in their encounter data. It also mandates reporting on whether at-home health risk assessments were done by insurer-affiliated entities or independent third parties.
On the clinical side, House Resolution 8201 seeks to expand community health centers to provide behavioral, mental health, and substance use disorder services. It proposes $700 million annually from fiscal years 2027 through 2031 to the Department of Health and Human Services.
And to address the fentanyl crisis, we have House Resolution 2004, also known as Tyler's Law. This bipartisan bill directs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to study emergency department testing practices for fentanyl, looking at costs, benefits, and privacy. They will then issue guidance on whether routine screening should become standard procedure.
Finally, for healthcare, House Resolution 9390, the Prices on the Wall Act of 2026, introduced by Representative Miller Meeks. It requires hospitals, surgical centers, labs, and imaging providers to physically display discounted cash prices for shoppable services on their premises by January 1, 2028.
Now, let us switch gears to energy. There is a cluster of bills addressing grid modernization and rising costs. Let us start with House Resolution 6529, the Protecting Families from AI Data Center Energy Costs Act.
This is a direct response to the massive power demands of artificial intelligence data centers. The bill mandates that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, convene a technical conference with utilities, regulators, and consumer advocates to develop rate structures that protect residential and small commercial ratepayers from shouldering these high energy costs.
Along those same lines, House Resolution 9340, the Ratepayer Protection Act, amends the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. It shifts grid upgrade costs away from average consumers and onto large load customers who use 100 megawatts or more. Utilities would require these large users to cover the full incremental costs of any necessary generation, transmission, or distribution upgrades. State authorities have 2 years to implement this.
To get new energy projects online faster, House Resolution 2986, the Expediting Generator Interconnection Procedures Act of 2025, requires FERC to start rulemaking within 180 days. It focuses on using advanced computing, automation, and more accurate modeling to clear the backlogs in connecting new generation and storage projects to the grid.
And to make sure those lines are efficient, House Resolution 6633, the High Capacity Grid Act, mandates the use of best available transmission conductors for new and upgraded projects. It creates a regulatory presumption that costs for these high-performance low-sag conductors are recoverable in utility rates, while using inferior technology is presumed imprudent.
To wrap up energy, House Resolution 9335, the Advanced Transmission Technology to Reduce Rates Act, directs the Secretary of Energy to create a centralized clearinghouse for advanced transmission tech. It also requires the Department of Energy to share best practices for wildfire risk mitigation, like vegetation management, and exempts certain federally funded projects from specific National Environmental Policy Act requirements.
On the defense front, House Resolution 9495 outlines the Department of Defense Appropriations Act for 2027. It funds military personnel, training, and equipment across all branches, including the Space Force, Reserve, and National Guard. Notably, it sets guardrails to protect the independence of legislative liaison offices and funds the Counter-Islamic State of Iraq and Syria Train and Equip Fund, which has strict vetting and reporting rules.
Let us touch on some key executive nominations that have been submitted. We have Barbara Thornhill nominated to be Director of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking, with the rank of Ambassador at Large. For ambassadorial posts, Stanley Brown is nominated for Equatorial Guinea, Joseph Burkhalter for Moldova, Keith Noreika for Lithuania, and John Hurley as representative to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
There are also several nominations for the United States International Trade Commission, including David Foley Jr., Brett Doyle, Samuel Nagatu, Peter Anthony Pappas for reappointment, and Bartholomew Thanhauser. Additionally, Edward Epler is nominated as Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Transportation, Karen Sessions as a Commissioner of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, Kevin Lilly as Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife, and Michael J. Hendershot to be a United States District Judge for the Northern District of Ohio.
Finally, let us review the latest House proceedings from late June 2026. On June 25th, the House passed House Resolution 2478, the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, by a massive 414-2 vote aimed at protecting vulnerable adults. They also celebrated the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, which limits corporate ownership of single-family homes.
But it was not all celebration. There was heated debate and calls to impeach Secretary of Education Linda McMahon over the unauthorized dismantling of her department and transferring special education programs. Members also called for permanent residency for Ukrainian humanitarian parolees and offered tributes to Currituck Jack and Bishop Theodore Larry Kirkland Sr.
The day before, on June 24th, Representative Comer pushed the Senate to pass the SAVE Act to require voter identification. The session also featured tributes to individuals like Sheriff Dale Frogford, Mother Christine Ashley Davis, and Joe Wade Ellis. Representatives Leisure Fernandez and Jayapal led a moment of silence for Juniper Blessing, advocating for transgender rights.
So what should our listeners watch out for next? Keep an eye on how the Senate handles these new healthcare transparency and energy grid bills, and watch for the upcoming confirmation hearings on those key diplomatic and trade nominations.
That is all for today's Capital Catch-Up. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.